So both Rich and Eric mentioned the low-income housing tax credit is obviously a critical source of funding. But Todd, I'm wondering if there are other opportunities to leverage private sources of financing for supportive housing, and whether, in particular, you've thought about social impact bonds.
Yeah, well, I think that the answer is yes. The supportive housing industry really is ideally aligned with the social impact bond structure, right? Because you have measurable outcomes that you really, you can track over time. And I think that you'll be able to see more. The challenge, I think, with social impact bonds, as I see it right now, is that they haven't been able to scale up yet, right? They've been sort of really project focused, right? And I think the largest one that has been issued is 22 million.
Yep.
Right? Now that's a lot, right, to put
Yep.
into a program, but can you scale it up? And can you get broader distribution? I think the bonds have primarily been sold to some institutions, socially responsible institutions, but also high net worth individuals that are looking for this type of investment. Can you broaden the distribution for social impact bonds and really kind of scale up so that you're able to leverage more dollars? And my thought is that the answer is yes, and you can combine social impact bonds with project finance, potentially. Vicki talked about the shelter finance programs, right? Can you use it to sort of leverage that or combine shelter with some more permanent housing or transition housing? And I think, I guess the answer is yes. I think that there are ways to do it. The social impact bond model has to be refined, I think, a little bit more. We got to think broader for how do we really use it and apply it, and then can we use it in conjunction with some other resources to get maybe a larger result, a result that at the end of the day you end up with permanent shelter units or transition units or formerly homeless units.
Great. So, Councilmember Williams, one of the challenges that supportive housing developers often face is community resistance. So, I'd like to ask you again about sort of what role the council can play and what information you would need to help reassure communities and understand and help them to educate them to understand the critical need for supportive housing in all neighborhoods in the city.
Oh, it's an interesting question. But I think there's always going to be some sort of NIMBY, right? So we're never going to eliminate it completely. When people's neighborhood changes, they're going to have a problem. And then when we're bringing in folks that people don't feel should be in the neighborhood for one reason or other, there's always going to be pushback, and it's going to be immediate, and it's going to be forceful. And it's about, I think, breaking down. One, I think it's always important to talk about what type of supportive housing is going to be there. There's often, all supportive housing is just a homeless shelter. That's what people hear when they hear supportive housing, regardless of what you say. So being more explicit in exactly what it is being provided and what services are being there from the beginning, and maybe with more stakeholders. A lot of times it goes to, I think, community board presentations, and that doesn't usually trickle down to the community itself. So figuring out how to get that information to there's usually the Civic Association, Block Association. You might want to knock on a couple of doors also with exactly where the supportive housing is going to be, because they're usually the last ones to know, and just really explain what it is, who's going to be in there, and what support services are actually going to be. And you're going to have to present some data of where other supportive housing sites are, and that actually the property values didn't go down and crime didn't go up. So really having hard answers and data to show where this has worked in the past, and getting it to the people who are going to be affected and more stakeholders earlier.
So I feel like you've set me up to say that we actually did some research on this question. Ben, Vicki, back when she was at the Furman Center with me, we did do some work looking at the impacts of supportive housing on neighborhoods, and we found no evidence that supportive housing reduced property values in communities. But it also sounds like what you're saying is people fear the worst, and so making sure that you get information to them is really critical. So, let me just ask. I want to ask one more question of Commissioner Bean, which I know is one of her favorite questions, which is going back to this preservation question. Again, we've talked about resources, being limited to some degree, and Councilmember Williams, you talked about the importance of sort of figuring out the choices of which projects to preserve, and I'm wondering how can the city, make those decisions about prioritizing among which projects to preserve.
Well, I just have to note the irony of this question here, because when the Furman Center launched the Subsidized Housing Information Project, our SHIP, we had a little round table about preservation policy, and Ingrid as moderator and I as moderator and Vincent Reyna as moderator kept asking everybody, how are you going to choose? You're not going to have enough dollars to go around. How are you going to make priorities? How are you going to choose? And basically people refused to choose. It was like nobody wanted to say who their favorite children were. I am not as smart as any of those people, so I am going to actually try to answer the question, which is always dangerous, right? But we will have to make hard choices. That, as Fran Ryder said this morning, governing is about making hard choices, and we will certainly be looking at the cost-benefit calculation, and one of the costs that we will be certainly very aware of goes back to something that Eric was saying, which is we have to be very cognizant of the way in which our preservation policies might have the unintended consequence of actually encouraging some bad behavior if what we're doing is helping to drive up the acquisition costs for preservation purchasers. So we have to be very careful about the way in which our preservation policies interact with the incentives that over-leveraged buyers, I guess is the best way of putting it, might have. So we will be very careful on that cost front. On the benefit side, I think that one of the central tenets of the housing plan, again, is that we will do everything we can to foster diverse and thriving neighborhoods, not just housing, but diverse and thriving neighborhoods, as Councilmember Williams said. And so we will be looking at what does this particular preservation project contribute to the community in terms of the income diversity that it brings, in terms of the contribution that it makes to what this particular neighborhood needs. A second key tenet that we'll be using in setting the priorities is that we are trying to work holistically across the agencies and across the city's investments. And so we want our preservation dollars to also be leveraging the dollars that we're putting into new construction, the dollars that we're putting into new schools, to new infrastructure, to parks, to jobs. So we'll be looking holistically to say, does this preservation project contribute to and leverage the other investments that we and other agencies are making? So those will be two of the things that we're going to be very concerned about on the benefit side of that calculation. And we will have to make hard choices, and that will be some of the tenets that really drive those hard choices.
Yeah, Todd?
Just a quick point, because I think that Eric and Vicki have laid out, just in terms of preservation, a great strategy. You have to be clear about what the process is. The process has to be efficient. You got to be preemptive, and you have to be able to provide information that are going to help people make investment decisions. So the one thing that I think is an extension of that, and Vicki just mentioned it, just in terms of coordinating all of the resources that the city has, is that if there's a concern about predatory equity that's out there, right? There's a lot of equity that's out there, but the New York City pension funds should then be investing in funds that are making socially responsible investments. There are not a ton, but there are funds out there, right, that are focused on preservation of affordable, right, or urban development. So, let's make sure that in addition to all the other great stuff that we're doing, which, you guys are experts in it, and you're doing a great job, make sure that the pension funds are also supporting that by helping to fund investors that are really focused on this business.